Hello, this is Lynn Fraser. I'm here today with Resmaa Menakem. I'm with the Kiloby Center for Recovery, and this is part of the Radical Recovery Summit. So I'm going to just ask you, Resmaa, to introduce yourself. Absolutely. And some people might wonder why trauma is so relevant to addiction. So maybe you could speak a little bit about that too as we get started.
Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me. I'm so looking forward to spending this time with you. And I am, and may the ancestors guide what I say to you and what I say to the audience as well as what they hear. I have been doing work around trauma for about 30 years. I started working with women and children. I worked with people who've been addicted. I was a clinical director for a domestic violence treatment center for a number of years. And as we know, the currents, when somebody is in a domestic violence situation, there's usually cross currents of other things that show up too. So addiction shows up when you're dealing with those families. Issues of trauma shows up when you're dealing with those families, as well as economic and racial things show up when you're dealing with those families. Incarceration when you're dealing with those families. So for me, this idea of dealing with addictions also brings the kind of currents, or cross currents also. And so it was just a natural fit for me when I actually started doing more work in social work. It was just a natural fit to also focus on trauma because it was just showing up in the room. There was no way to get around it. The only way I could get around dealing with trauma is to be blind to it, or not know what I was seeing, right? Or thinking that what I was seeing was only about behavior or only about cognition. And I learned, pretty quick into my work that when I ignored things like that, I couldn't help people. And so my whole thing has been wanting to help people. So that's kind of how the addiction thing comes for me.
Yeah. Well, in your book, My Grandmother's Hands, is an amazing piece of knowledge and understanding. It's so practical.
Thank you.
And, in my work with my own trauma and the work that I do with other people too, it's so clear that it happens in your body.
Yes.
And so the emphasis all the way through that, and you talk about white bodies and black bodies and police bodies. Could you kind of go into that a little bit more?
Absolutely. So in this society, we have a tendency, and this society is built on in America. And I would say that when we talk about traumas, one of the things that we have a tendency to do is start just in the personal, right? We start in the personal realm. What happened to me? Right? Or why did, and the reason why I'm acting like this is because this thing happened to me. We start in the personal, and the personal is important. But I also think that it's what I call HIP theory, HIPP. And that is that when somebody's personal traumas are triggered, usually it's not just the person. It is why people who have certain types of personal traumas, you can have one person who has the same personal trauma as you, but you get so overwhelmed by it that it incapacitates you, or it makes you react in ways that are that seem like they're out of proportion to what it is that you're dealing with. And so I've come to the conclusion that many times when people are dealing with traumas, they're dealing with the historical aspects of it. So they're dealing with historical things. There's some research that's coming out now that's starting to say that traumas actually can be transmitted up to 14 generations epigenetically, right, in the body. And what happens is that when that is going on, because trauma over time becomes decontextualized, what happens is that we don't have a way of explaining these sensations or these vibes or these thoughts or these racings or these behaviors and we can't. There is no current language to describe why this much overwhelm is there, right? And so we figure out ways around it. And this is where I think it dovetails into addiction, is that when you can't explain the sheer grief, horror, and terror of something, you're going to try and find a way around it. Or you internalize it and think that something is defective in you. And so what I think is that there's these historical aspects that we need to attend to. There are these intergenerational aspects that we need to attend to that get transferred down to us, not just by what people say to us in the story of the verbal story, but also in the nervous system story. How does my mama's react? How does my mother's nervous system react to something? And then how is that showing up in my mother's nervous system decontextualized? And then how do I learn that as personality or culture, right? And then there are these persistent institutional things that continue to reinforce it. And then you also have the personal trauma, right? And so when I'm wading in or working with somebody in trauma, I'm thinking about them through the lens of HIP, through the historical aspect, through the intergenerational aspects, through the persistent institutional aspects, and then also the personal aspects. So when I am working with somebody, let's say I'm working with somebody that's African American, when I'm sitting with them and they start to begin to describe things in terms of their feelings or visions or sensations or stuff like that, one of the first things I do as a trauma therapist is to help to contextualize what has been decontextualized, right? So when they say something that to them feels weird or feels like if I say this, he's gonna sign me up for something, or when I contextualize it, now all of a sudden it makes sense. And there's a shift that can be subtly in what I call in the subtle field begin to happen in the nervous system. They may not be able to see it or experience themselves, but as a practitioner, because I'm on the outside, I may be able to pick up on it because I've seen it a number of times, right? I've worked with a number of different nervous systems so I can see it. And so when I'm dealing with historical trauma, that which doesn't necessarily have a verbal explanation, but my body's reacting to it in terms of protection, right? I actually am trying to help people contextualize what is going on for them, and not put and help them create some distance by which they don't need to put the defect inside of them, right? They don't need to carry that or hold that piece. And so when I break the book down into Black bodies and white bodies and police bodies, what I'm talking about is that there's a particular experience that people of color have in this society. That the white body is the supreme standard by which all bodies, humanities has been measured against, right? And if you don't understand that, and if you understand colonization, if you don't understand land theft, if you don't understand genocide, right? If you don't understand those very fundamental pieces around how this whole thing was established, then everything else will be decontextualized in confusion. And so when I'm working with somebody and I start from a place of genocide, or I start from a place of enslavement, or I start from a place of land theft, or I start from those places, that's not to create more horror in them. It is to contextualize not just what their bodies may have gone through, but what their ancestors' bodies may have gone through and what got passed down. And so when I talk to people of color, I say there have been these things that have been established with regard to hierarchy, racial hierarchy. And that racial hierarchy idea was infused in the very institutions that established America and many other European countries, right? Because when we talk about just in terms of enslavement, what we know is that it wasn't just America that was involved in the enslavement process. What we know is that the Portuguese, Spanish, French, English, but we know that in terms of, now, were there African countries that were involved with that? Absolutely, but what we must remember is, when you look at it, if you look at who the wealth was, who gleaned the wealth from that endeavor, right? It was not African countries, right? And so this idea that trauma can be then passed down, especially if there is no remediation, right? That trauma can be passed down is not just true for the Black body. It's also true for the white body, because what people forget is that when we talk about America, the 13 colonies were filled with white people who had been colonized, right? We forget that the first movements of the powerful white bodies were to colonize less powerful white bodies.
Right.
Right? And so by the time we get to America, and you can have 15,000 white bodies that can watch here in Minneapolis, in Minnesota, that can watch 3 Black men get lynched, and they will stand there and nobody will render aid. Imagine the smell, imagine the sounds. So when that happens, what is the moral injury that gets passed down through white body that now in 2019 looks like culture? Because what happened in the body of white people and white children who saw that, wanted to make a move and could not, right? What got passed down to them, and then how does that continue to get perpetuated and then infused in the institutional structures? So when I'm talking about white body supremacy, that's what I'm talking about as an organizing structure that we, when I'm talking about trauma, that we must also look at and begin to grapple with as people. So.
So one of the things that comes to mind as you're speaking as well is that in the absence of some kind of explanation that makes sense, we come up with something that's usually devaluing to us.
Exactly. It's what we have to do in order to survive something, right? If something is happening to you and it doesn't make logical sense, right? If something is happening to me and it's coming to me in images, or it's coming to me in a sensation, or it's coming to me as a vibe, right? If that doesn't make sense, there's nothing to do but to internalize it or dissociate from it, right? And if I don't have the ability to either fight or flee from this thing, I will freeze and dissociate from it. And so over time, that dissociate, now that makes sense as the trauma is happening to me, right? But what happens if that trauma happened to me when I'm 5, or the trauma happened to me before I'm in gestation, right? That the trauma happened to my mama's nervous system or my mother's nervous system. And so I'm floating around in that and being the hyper levels of cortisol, the hyper levels of norepinephrine, like all of those things are floating around. So by the time I become a baby, or by the time I get born, I've had all of these kind of chemicals and sensations that my nervous system can't process. So then when I'm born and I'm trying to operate in the world and I'm starting to begin to get these notions and experience these things, And there's nobody telling me, no, this is what it is. And this is how it is. Because the people before me don't know what it was.
Right.
Right?
Yeah.
So now my little nervous system is trying to manage that. And I better figure, and that is not even to account for if other traumas are currently happening to me personally.
Right.
Right? It's like the soup. I'm born into this soup, and then I come out, and then something happens to me to add to the soup, right? And so now I'm sitting here, and the weight of it is unexplainable. Nobody's explained it to me. Nobody. I don't even know who I go to. I go to my minister. My minister doesn't know how to talk to me about it. I go to my wife. My wife doesn't know how to talk to me about it. I go to a therapist. They don't know how to talk to me about it, right? But it's ravaging my body.
Yeah.
Right? It's ravaging my body. And so one of the things that happens is to get from underneath that energy and that pressure, I better smoke some weed. I better drink some alcohol. I better shoot something up, right? Because otherwise I can't make it, right? And so part of what I talk about is what's fueling the addiction, right? And if we can't get and help people explain not just the personal pieces, but also the historical pieces and what might have gotten passed down, not because my parents weren't smart, but because they didn't know what this was, because it's been decontextualized for such a long time. And so part of what I really try and do, especially with regard to addiction, is to help people understand you're not defective.
Right.
You're not defective. Something happened to you. Something has happened to your people. And there has to be something to confront that. And you've been trying to carry it all by yourself. And what I want to say to you is this: you're not defective. You don't have to carry it all by yourself. And some of what you're trying to carry by yourself is not supposed to be carried by you, because it just didn't happen to you. It happened to your people. So you trying to carry the load of some personally to something that happened to your people.
Right.
Right.
So that really kind of is a good segue too into the clean pain and dirty pain.
Yeah.
So can we actually be present? And if we can't,
that's right.
It's addiction, it's violence against others, it's all of those things.
Exactly right. And it's very hard to be present when your body's being ravaged, right? The idea of clean pain and dirty pain came from one of my mentors, Dr. David Snarr. She wrote a book called Passionate Marriage and the Sexual Crucible and different. He's a brilliant, brilliant man. He came up with this idea of clean and dirty. And we viscerally understand what that means. Like, when you're doing something dirty, you should be confronting yourself about something, but you figure out all different types of ways to go. And we viscerally know what that is, right? We also know what cleaning. We know, so when I talk about clean pain and dirty pain, what I want to make sure that people understand is that I'm not talking about pain and no pain. I'm talking about clean pain and dirty pain. There is pain associated with going through something cleanly, right? That when you try and go through something cleanly, there's still pain associated with it. But it's the pain that actually has capacity, whereas dirty pain does not have the capacity that clean pain has, right? Clean pain has the capacity to actually build, whereas dirty pain has the capacity to move you around it, right? It feels better because you have the experience that you're getting away from the pain, but you're only getting away from the dirty pain, right? Not the clean pain, because the clean pain is that gnawing, that gnawing knowing that I could be doing this differently, right? I could be doing this differently. And even if I don't know what to do, I know that I could be doing it, I could be doing something else. It's that clean pain comes when you're trying to go around something, and all of a sudden you have gone around it, you've gone around it, you've gone around it, you've used, and all of a sudden you get to this place where you go, I don't know what I'm going to do next, but I know I'm not doing that anymore.
Right.
Right? that's where the brightening occurs. That's where people have more agency and more space, but usually it's because they have gone through what I call the beautiful chaos, right? It's this chaos of constantly being confronted with the fact that you can't get around this anymore. And you figure out another way to get around it. And then you figure out another way. And then at some point, you come to this place where you go, yeah, that's not going to work for me anymore. And I don't know what to do next. And I figure it out, right? But the way but a lot of times you have to go through all of this subtle stuff first. All of this stuff that happens in the subtle field first, right? Using and then not using. Using and then not using. And usually when we do that, we think that there's a failure or some type of defect wrong with us, without understanding that for some of us, that has to be the process, right? For some of us, we can override, like, I'm done using, I'm done, right? And we can override, but what ends up, if you notice people that do that, even if they don't use again, they keep getting confronted with something else that needs to be healed. and those people usually can choose another addiction. So another more socially acceptable addiction.
Right.
So they turn into uber Muslims or uber Christian or uber, Jewish faith, right? Or uber Buddhism, right? They turn into those people, and you still have a sense that something is unsettled and unhealed, and they're the best yoga practitioners or the best breathers in the world, but you still have a sense that something is not quite settled, right? And that's usually what you're dealing with, is somebody who's been able to override their way through, addiction, but not necessarily heal through addiction, because the trauma stuff is still, the historical trauma stuff is still kind of fueling something, or the intergenerational is still fueling something. It's still there, right? It hasn't been, the energy of it hasn't been transformed.
So that's a pretty desperate place when people realize that it's not working for them anymore.
Yeah. This is why we need community. This is why in the book, when you've read the book, why I keep talking about that some of this you ain't supposed to hold by yourself. You have to develop community with people. You have to talk with people. You have to allow people to kind of hold you and witness you, so you can develop culture. Those desperate places, when you can't tap into your own resource, doesn't mean that you don't have resource, but when your own resource can't be tapped into for whatever reason, you better have somebody else's resources, somebody else's nervous system that you can tap into. You know what I mean? You better have somebody else's resources that you can tap into that can soften some of these pieces. You better have somebody outside of you that can see you in ways that you can't see yourself because you're in it, right? That you better be able to have somebody that can be talking to you and watch what happens to your face and watch what happens to your chest and your belly and your mouth and all of these places where that vagus nerve hit that tells you, am I socially engaged or did I just leave, right? Yeah. And a lot of times we try and figure those pieces out ourselves when that's not the process. Yes, it's your own work, and there is your own individual work and communal work, right? It takes sometimes going through the dark night of the soul 1,000 times
Mm-hmm.
before you can get to a place to where you go, okay, something else just shifted. It's subtle. It's not trumpets coming out of the sky saying I've arrived.
Right.
It is just a subtle little brightening that says, okay, yeah. Let's do that, right? And that let's do that is not these big epiphanies. It's usually just very quiet. Let's do that. Okay. And then once you do that, then other possibilities may shift and open, right? That can't happen when you keep asking, well, what do I do next? What do I do next? What do I do next? Those shifts don't necessarily, those subtle shifts don't happen when you're looking for an answer, because a lot of times when you're looking for an answer in order to get you out of the addiction, is to leapfrog the cleaning pain.
Mm-hmm. Right.
It's to leapfrog it. And sometimes when I'm working with people, I'm just saying, you got to hold that for a beat. I know this sounds excruciating. I know you want to rip your hair out, but I'm here with you. And I'm gonna help you hold this just for a beat. Just hold it just for a beat. And then let's see what comes after we hold it, right? Let's just see what comes. And what you notice is that people begin to deepen their capacity. Not in large jumps, just from here to here. Just almost imperceptible, just little pieces. And then you do that again. And then you do that again. And then you do that again. And then what starts to happen is that more resource energy starts to come in. Trauma, for me, trauma is as I define in the book, is anything that happens to you too much, too fast, too soon, or happens too long, without any with also coupled with not enough of something resource, right?
Yeah.
It's and so part of what happens when we're doing trauma work with people with regard to addiction or anything else is the resource in those sessions are, yes, the kind of large global resource in energy, but it's also, do they pick up resource in my nervous system as I'm working with?
Mm-hmm. Right.
Right? Can they align just a little bit with that piece? Right? And trauma really is about energy. At its core, it is about energy. It's what Einstein said. Energy can either be created nor destroyed. Right? But it can be manipulated. It can be thwarted. It can be constricted, right? But so when I'm looking at trauma, when I'm working with trauma in people's bodies, what I'm really doing is looking for and looking for opportunities to expand the resource energy that's present.
People being able to connect in with your energy during a session.
That's right.
Helping to co-regulate their system.
Yeah. So energy is very, very important. We are perceptive beings, right? And it's not just, we look for, many times as practitioners, we look for substantial movement, right? Or substantial things to happen, right? And we're not as good as looking for the subtle and looking for what happens in the subtle, what I call it a subtle field and substantial field, right? Mm-hmm. And those subtle fields are those things that happen. So there's subtle field and there's subtle practices. So subtle practices that are not necessarily like big things, like bigger things are like what I call something like yoga, and those are very important. Mindfulness and breathing stuff is very important, but also subtle practices like orienting, right? Just closing your eyes and noticing what sounds are in the front of you, back of you, side of you, right? Notice how you experience temperature on the skin on your face. Like, how do you notice that? What is it, what shifts or what changes from one moment to the next? Like more very subtle practices. And so part of what people also pick up on is energy, right? If I'm if a client of mine, I did 2 years in Afghanistan working with military contractors. As a I'm trained as I am a clinical social worker, and so one of the things that happened is that if people were telling me a horror story, right, a horrible, terrorizing, harrowing story, if my nervous system said, like if they and people don't pick up on, like, if I did this, that would be obvious, like holy balls, right? If I did that, that would be obvious. But if my nervous system shifted,
Right.
what had happened? Clients then go, oh, he can't handle it. And then they start taking care of me. They start limiting the story. This is why it's so important that when you're doing trauma work or body-oriented trauma work, that you have to do your own work.
Right.
Because your clients will pick up on the vibratory realm, the sensory realm, the feelings realm. They'll pick up on all of these realms that your logic, that you think that you're putting on, that you're doing something by giving them all of this, good information. And all of their hearing is, you are unsafe. You're not safe. You're not safe to me because you can't handle it. So when I'm sitting there listening to these stories, and I'm just listening, and I'm present, and there are times where they crack a joke, and I'm present enough that in the midst of that horror story, right, they crack some type of crass joke, right? I'm present enough to laugh.
Mm-hmm. Right.
That signals to them, oh, he's still here, right? Now, they wouldn't tell you that. They wouldn't say to you, oh, this is what I picked up on, because it's not perceptible. But those are the things that the nervous system in the body picks up on. And so part of what we have to begin to do is let people know that we are safe, not by what we're saying, but by us doing our work in a way that allows us to be, allows our nervous system to have resource and more resource, so those that come to us can actually tap into it, right?
And in your book, you talked about a lot about the vagus nerve and Dr. Stephen Porges' work around the system. Yeah. And one of the things he says is safety is the treatment.
Yes, it absolutely is.
It is.
And not talking about safety.
Right.
Not saying we're going to create a safety plan.
Right.
Yes. Right. Not that. Is your nervous system safe?
Right.
Is it safe? That's bottom line. Is the energy that I'm experiencing from you, is it safe?
Right.
Right. And I've been doing a lot of work with, doing the work with the vagal nerve, but I also been doing some work lately with the psoas muscle. I mean, that idea, I think that the vagal nerve and the psoas muscle, and they actually intersect. Mm-hmm. Right. And so the idea of that hip area, that psoas muscle going up through the lower back, the reason why I think that's so important is that is a primary mobilizing muscle.
Right.
And when we get traumatized, those mobilizing muscles can get stuck in a very subtle way, right? And we start to experience aches or experience things in that area, shutting down, not wanting anybody to be around that area, right? All different types of things. And so what I've been doing a lot lately is stretching.
Oh, okay.
Is taking my clients through stretching first. Specifically some stretches in that psoas, right? Just some wide stance, sitting down and then coming up, a lot of stretching stuff in that area. And what I found is that it gives clients just a little bit more space. It's not these leaps that everybody's looking for. Just a
Right.
little, they can deal with a little bit more of something than they could the time before.
The fundamentals of this is safety
Yeah.
and safety in our nervous system, really experiencing that for ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
and connection.
Yeah.
So somebody has a lot of experience of fear and just dissociation and addiction.
Mm-hmm.
They're not going to feel very connected.
That's right. That's right. Nor should they.
Yes.
Because if they're out there being addicted and they're in the streets and they shooting up and they're having to do things and they're in unsafe situations, the last thing I want to do as a trauma therapist is go, you really need to just start trusting people.
Yeah.
You know,
Yeah.
right? That's the last thing I want to do. That's disrespectful, right?
Yeah.
But what I do want to do is say, for this moment, in this time, with me and you, right now, what do you know?
Right.
And then usually what comes up for people is maybe a little bit of resource, but as soon as that resource shows up, so does the fear, so does the anger, so does the guilt, so does the shame. All that shows up too. And that's what a lot of therapists, and I think trauma therapists miss sometimes, is that things are coupled and can be coupled and over coupled together. And so when you bring up this resource that you think is a really good thing that people should have and try and attain, what you forget is that resource is also tied to a protective response that actually helps these people survive. So the moment you pick this up, if you don't understand the other side of that right, and then you wonder why, how come they didn't come back? Why aren't they coming back? And why are they using again? And I thought we were going, well, it's because what you didn't account for the protective responses.
Right.
You didn't account for the protectiveness, and the very thing that allowed them to survive was not being vulnerable.
Mm-hmm.
And you just pushed vulnerability right in their face because you wanted to tap into a resource too fast.
Right.
Right? There are clients that I have where it may be 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 a year, right? Of them just noticing what their feet feel like inside their shoes.
Mm-hmm. Right.
Because anything going further than that overwhelms them like that.
Right.
Right? How do I begin to help them create space? How do I get them to begin to move some of that energy or move that image? Like a lot of people will come in talking to me about images, not just an image, but the speed of the image or the direction of the image, right? So let's say the images are going like that very fast, right? That's what's disconcerting in the body,
Mm-hmm.
right? Or the image is going from the back to the front. It's not just the image, but the texture of the image.
Right.
And if you can't, and one of the first things that I may do is just have them experience that spinning, not in their head, but experience the spinning 6 feet out.
Mm-hmm.
So what would it be like to notice not the spinning going on in your head, but noticing that same spinning 6 feet out, right? And sometimes when you do that, you'll watch people's body go.
Right. Because it's not so threatening anymore.
Yeah, it's distance, right?
Yeah.
And then what they'll do is they'll flip right back into the protective response because now they're vulnerable.
Right.
Right. But a lot of helpers, a lot of people don't understand that, right? They don't understand that piece.
Right.
And so what ends up happening is that and we do this too as therapists, we end up putting the defect back into the person. Right. So we start looking for, well, what didn't they tell me? Or they didn't tell me that they were sexually abused when they were 4. Or they didn't, that explains why they went into relapse again. No. What may have made them go back into relapse again is the fact that you weren't accounting for the energy and you moved them too fast, and then the trauma vortex took over.
Right. And there's always a reason why these protective mechanisms are there. They really need to be honored.
They need to be honored, sis. They need to be honored. And if you don't honor them, they ain't gonna mess with you. People are not going to mess with you if you don't.
Yeah.
They will not, because it's too much.
Mm-hmm,
It's
mm-hmm.
too much. It's too much for me, for you to come into an office. So a lot of my clients right now are uh, African American, Native American, and poor white people, right? Mostly activists and people who are trying to get out, who are doing a lot of activating.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that has been so hurtful and continues to be wounding and rewounding for a lot of people of color is going into an office with a white therapist and having to explain to them and not having the language to explain to them what is happening.
Right.
Right? Not having the language to explain that you are wounding me right now by things that you're doing or things that you're saying. But because I don't know what it is and I don't have a language for it, now I can't come see you. Right? Your body being the standard of humanity and the standard of humanness
Mm-hmm. Right.
wounds me.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
That is wounding to me.
Yeah.
My body it is a relatively new occurrence that the black body has had some relative dominion over itself.
Right.
For
right.
most of our histories together, the white body has had full and unfettered access to the black body.
Mm-hmm.
And I mean full and unfettered. I mean every orifice,
Mm-hmm.
I mean every product of work, every idea,
Mm-hmm.
the white body has had access to the black body.
Right.
And so there is a wounding that has occurred and continues to occur in that experience. And most white practitioners don't understand that. Most police officers don't understand that. There's a particular experience that the black body has had, that the Latino body has had, that the Muslim body has had with police and policing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And so those things are the base, the soup that all of this floats around in, that colonialism floats around in, that land theft and genocide and enslavement, that all those things are floating around. And as white practitioners, if you can't tolerate getting in there and understanding that and how that shows up and how supremacy gets passed down, this is not about it being a good white person or a bad white person. This is about, if you want to help heal people that are sitting in front of you, and especially people of color, you have to understand that.
Right.
Not just on a cognitive level.
Right. In our bodies.
In the bodies, and in community, and developing community, right. So you can understand it.
Well, one thing that maybe we could just end with is, in your book, you talk about trauma is something that happens to us and that we can heal.
That's exactly right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
We lean towards healing. We lean towards healing. We lean towards being healed, right?
Yes.
And there is a capacity that we all have. Some of the most horrible things that happen to a person, you look at them and you go, how did you make it, right? There's this guy that I've been listening to. He's a Marine. He's a Navy SEAL. He's a Black Navy SEAL. His name is David Goggins. His language is a little blue, but he talks about that we are so much more than we believe we are, right? Mm-hmm. And when we've been beat down and brutalized, easy to believe the defect, right? And those that have gone through that beautiful kind of chaos, that have gone through it and get on the other side, we can get on the other side and we can go, oh, right? that I've been able to experience something that I wouldn't have been able to experience had that not have occurred, right? I hope I don't go through it again, right? Healing is always present. Resource is always present. Resource existed before trauma did,
Mm-hmm.
right? And sometimes some of us have experienced trauma for so long, or our people have experienced trauma for so long that we forget that resource existed before that did.
Mm-hmm.
That individual resource existed as energy before that did. That communal resource existed before that, right? Mm-hmm. And so part of my work is to help people remember that.
Right. And to be able to tap into that for themselves in a way that's not too fast or overwhelming.
Exactly right.
Yeah.
Exactly right. Exactly.
Well, and then there's no need to escape into addiction or anything that we do to escape.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah. And I understand it.
Right.
And I understand it.
Mm-hmm.
I understand it. I understand it from I grew up with a father who was addicted. And for years and years and years, I was like angry. Yeah, right. Mm-hmm. Just get it together, right?
Yeah.
But I understand it now. I understand it differently now.
Right.
I understand it differently. I don't mean that some of the things that happened that I like, I'm not a glutton for punishment. I'm glad that happened, but I understand it differently now. Mm-hmm. Than I did. I understand the historical aspects of what my dad dealt with. I understand what the intergenerational stuff was. I understand the persistent institutional stuff and his own personal stuff. I understand that now in a much more clear and less judgmental way than I did before. It's allowed me to heal,
Right.
So.
Because it's not your fault. Yeah, thank you so much for this. It's been really fascinating talking with you. And I really wanted to get your voice into this summit because it's so important, your understanding
Thank you.
And the knowing you have that this is something we can heal from. And
yes, that's right. Yeah. That's right. We certainly and develop culture that can hold this work communally.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's really the answer. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you.
Lovely meeting you.
Yeah, lovely meeting you too.
Go to kilobyscenter.com, Radical Recovery Summit, for access to the interviews. You can watch them free online, or you could purchase an all-access pass. kilobyscenter.com.